there's a sense that you should fall into these neat categories in relationships, and that you're only supposed to have a close and deep feeling for somebody if the goal is to see how long that can possibly last, right? That's what the relationship escalator means. You start seeing them casually, you get more serious, then you commit, and then you commit further, then you have kids, then you get property together, and blah, 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 blah.
Hey everybody, before we start the show, I want to make a couple disclaimers. This show does cover a wide variety of topics related to mental health and life in general, and some of those could be sensitive for you. I want to simultaneously encourage you to be brave in consuming difficult content, but also respect and recognize your limitations. So please use your best judgment. I will never be offended if you need to skip a question or an episode entirely, but feel free to feel it out, check out the episode, and just see what happens. If you need to skip, that's okay, but feel free to give it a shot first. I also need to say that while I am a psychologist, I'm not your psychologist, and I'm not your therapist. This is not intended to be direct medical advice, and you should not use this as a substitute for professional help. So with those said, let's go ahead and get into the show.
All right. Hello, friends of all varieties. This is the Hardcore Self-Help Podcast, episode 351. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Duff, aka Duff the Psych. I make mental health content for real people just like you. And today we have a question and answer episode. I have two really good questions from listeners like yourselves. If you would like to send me in a question for a future episode of the show, I encourage you to do so. Please shoot me an email to duffthepsych@gmail.com. As well, the contact form on my website should be nice and functional again, so you can do that. The questions here are nothing too intense, but two really good questions, like I said. And regarding the website, it is still a work in progress, but there's more and more stuff changing each week. So it should be more and more functional every time you go. Thank you to everybody who has pointed out areas where there are some issues. For example, there were some issues with some URLs that I had referenced that were not correct, and those are corrected now, and we're putting back in old blog posts that were popular, and I've also been putting in new blog posts as well. In particular, there is a new blog post that I put up recently about exposure hierarchies or courage ladders, and I included an app that I made myself to help you develop a courage ladder. In the future, I'll also be putting up some other free tools for developing or working through ABC thought logs and things of that sort. So make sure you head over to duffthepsych.com and browse around, see what we have there. And still, if there's anything that you notice that's broken or anything that you would like that is not there, please just shoot me an email or a message on, social media and let me know. But yeah. It is about 5:00 p.m. That's when I'm getting a chance to record this. And tonight I am showing my age by going to a sleep study. So at 9:45 tonight, I'll be going into a laboratory and getting hooked up to some machines and hoping that I can sleep in their facsimile of a comfortable bedroom. Oh boy. I'm not looking forward to it, but, it is what it is. I got to see, if there's anything going on regarding sleep apnea or anything like that. It's a little hard to tell for myself because I have terrible allergies and asthma and things of that sort. So is it sleep apnea or am I just always, stuffy duffy? Anyways, let's go ahead and get into the questions, guys. I have two really good questions here. Let's get into the first one. So the first question reads, "Hi, Dr. Duff. I want to start by praising you and your work. I've learned so much from your podcast over the years. You always have valuable information to share about a wide variety of topics, and frankly, I've gained a lot of insight from your wisdom, so I really appreciate you. I have an interesting situation I'm dealing with currently. I'm wondering, how do you deal with grief and the dread of losing someone or something before it goes? I'm in a relationship that began as more of a friends with benefits situation, and it naturally blossomed into more. Oopsies. I currently live in Georgia, and I'm going back to Colorado for graduate school, and I'm struggling with the thought that we will eventually have to let go of one another. I'm experiencing a sort of dissonance because the relationship itself is far from broken, so my brain is telling me that it does not need to be fixed, but letting go of her is going to be inevitable. And frankly, it's the healthiest relationship I've ever been in, and I don't want to let it go, but I'm not willing to do long distance because it will interfere greatly with both of our lives, and neither of us deserve half-assed time and energy. It's a very crappy feeling having to grieve something that I've not lost yet. I struggle with this regarding the thought of losing my grandma someday too. Any advice on how to mitigate or manage early grieving to the point where it's not interfering with daily life? Thanks a million. So thank you. I appreciate the kind words. I mean, even the fact that you can say, you've listened to me over the years is still mind-blowing to me. Someone asked, I guess I was out in public and chatting it up with somebody, and they asked how long I've had my podcast. And I was like, oh God, I got to count backwards in the years. And it's wild. It doesn't feel like that long. Sometimes I feel like I'm still just getting started with it. So I appreciate you for being along over the years. And I appreciate the question as well. It's a good one. And I believe it's one that will be applicable to many people. The experience of basically pre-grieving is something that many people go through. When there's sort of this inevitability that something is going to happen no matter what, it's normal to begin sorting through your feelings and sometimes even experiencing stages of grief before it ever happens. It's something that can be painful, but I also think it can be beneficial in many cases. In my line of work as a neuropsychologist, I actually witness this a lot. If you think about it, a lot of the families and spouses that I talk to for patients of mine that I see for testing are facing the inevitability of death, like you talked about with your grandmother. So imagine, somebody that has Alzheimer's disease, which is a progressive degeneration in their brain that inevitably leads to them dying by complications. So their family will see them transition from basically being the same person they've always been to being a completely different person. In that way, they need to face the anticipation of the person dying in a few years' time. And also they need to grieve the person that they have already lost due to the impact of the disease, because often they seem like a different person. It's a different interaction because of the disease course. So yeah, I see this a lot. And all this is to say, I don't think there's anything wrong with you that you've already started feeling the dread and the difficult emotions about what feels like an inevitable parting of ways. And I'm really glad to hear that your relationship is going well right now. That's awesome. It sounds like it's a beautiful thing that has been born out of a real connection between the two of you. Even though you didn't intend for it to become serious, it just happened, as you said, oopsies, which I think is a testament to how well you two work together. And that's great. As I said, that's a beautiful thing. And I think it's important to recognize that there's not one single way that this needs to go. You have options, and they don't always have to look like every single other relationship or breakup that you've seen. One way to look at this is that relationships are allowed to naturally go through transitions. So, for example, you guys are allowed to transition from a relatively close and committed relationship back to essentially friends, or friends with benefits when the opportunity presents itself. That doesn't mean that you did something wrong or that she did something wrong, just that relationships are allowed to transition due to the circumstances at hand. There's this really good book called Stepping Off the Relationship Escalator. I'm not sure who it's by. Let me check really quick. Stepping Off the Relationship Escalator by Amy Gahan, Gahran. Stepping Off the Relationship Escalator. What is it? Uncommon Love and Life. So it's a really good book. I haven't read through the whole thing, but I've read through some of it. And I know people that have read through all of it, and I've gotten the highlights of that. It's a really good book that may be interesting to you. As most people who listen to the podcast know, I am non-monogamous, meaning my wife and I are not exclusively with each other. We date other people, sleep with other people, have relationships with other people. And that's not because there's something broken in our relationship. It's because that's how we enjoy living our life. And it is, for us, a positive. But even if you are monogamous, there's a lot that you can get out of this book. It's essentially about recognizing and questioning the programming that many of us have about what a relationship should look like, and how there's basically this one specified path that you should be shooting for. There's a sense that you should fall into these neat categories in relationships, and that you're only supposed to have a close and deep feeling for somebody if the goal is to see how long that can possibly last, right? That's what the relationship escalator means. You start seeing them casually, you get more serious, then you commit, and then you commit further, then you have kids, then you get property together, and blah, 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 right? The relationship escalator. And this is breaking that down. I understand the inclination. It's kind of built into a lot of us. Why would you want to end something that works well? Why would you want to end a good thing? At the same time, how often do you see relationships that try to hold on way longer than they should until something disastrous tears them apart? right? Whether that's a job-related thing, moving away, infidelity, what have you. There's a lot of different things where relationships have kind of run their course, but nobody wants to quit. They want to stay committed to show that they can, and because that's what they're supposed to do. And then eventually something else comes in and tears them apart. There's something beautiful about being able to let go of something before it gets bad. To me, it's kind of like thinking about leaving a job that you really, really enjoyed. Maybe you even loved your job, but it's simply because you're moving, or maybe you found something that will allow you to grow in a different way that's important to you. We don't tend to judge ourselves for that as much, right? So this can be similar. This can be letting go of something or changing something before it becomes disastrous. When you ask about the grief that you're already experiencing and how to deal with it, the answer is to deal with it, to face it head on and not ignore it. I would ask, have you guys talked about this very much? I feel like talking through it together could be a very, very important way of processing it. As well, aside from talking about it with your partner, journaling about it, writing out your mixed feelings, and really processing it on paper or whatever format works for you can be very helpful. Essentially, you just want to approach rather than avoid. Right now, you feel like this is one of the healthiest relationships you've ever had. You feel like the distance that's coming up would be really, really disruptive to both of your lives and relationships in the way that it currently stands. And I'm assuming you don't feel like it's appropriate to consider changing plans for one another. All of those things are allowed to be true. It is what it is. I would start by seeing if you're on the same page about it, if you both feel similarly, that things are not going to work out long distance, and then you can be open about your feelings of sadness or confusion or frustration, because essentially you guys are in this together. It's not like one of you is trying to pull the plug. You both have a difficult situation coming up, and you both need to figure out what to do about that. So I would advise authenticity and honesty if possible. Can you imagine how it might feel if you were able to say, hey, babe, gosh, I feel so frustrated and mixed up by this because I really don't feel like it's going to be fair to either of us to try to do this long distance. At the same time, I don't know that I've met anybody I feel so in tune with, and I'm going to miss what we have so much. Right? Those are all truths. Like, you feel frustrated, you feel unsure of what to do, you care about her, you don't want to have to let this go, and you also feel like you do have to. So boom, that's real, that's vulnerable, that's meaningful, and that would help out a lot. You don't have to know how these conversations are going to shake out before you begin them. It would be arrogant to think that you can play it in the perfect way so that everything is very, very smooth and you can predict the outcome. There's also two of you in this relationship, right? A lot of times we think about our side, but what about the other person's? There's two of you here, and she may have thoughts or feelings that are important for you to hear as well. Maybe they're convincing, maybe they're on the same page as yours. You don't really know unless you talk about them. So opening that up and inviting the two-way dialogue is extremely important here. You mentioned that it's something that, you kind of alluded to the fact that it could be interfering with your everyday life. And I suspect that one of the reasons that sort of pre-grief is interfering is that you might be avoiding it a bit. I've been thinking a lot about acceptance and commitment therapy recently as sort of a therapeutic modality. And one of the ways that ACT therapy is conceptualized is thinking of mental health issues in that they sometimes arise because of our attempts to avoid them. In other words, one of the reasons your grief might be so painful and disruptive is because you're trying to control it and trying to mitigate it rather than actually experiencing it. You're allowed to be sad about this. You should be. It fucking sucks that you can't just ride the high of this relationship forever and capitalize on this amazing connection that you've made. Truly. I feel really bad for the situation. At the same time, there's also a lot of beauty in it. How amazing is it to know that you've learned so much from this relationship? Maybe it's even helped you understand your own worth and what you should be looking for in a relationship so that you can be better at recognizing these things in the future. That's a beautiful gift. But yes, you are already starting to grieve. That can involve various feelings and all the different stages that come along with grief. You could be angry at the universe, at yourself, maybe even at her. Maybe you're desperate to find a way to work things out and sort of bargaining with the world. Maybe you're sad, despondent. All of these things are okay. That's what happens when we grieve. But in time, regardless of what your decision is, you will heal. It'll become easier to see the beauty of it, and the pain will become hazier. It's not gone, but it's more in the background. And what a great thing to be able to say you don't hate this person that you were in a relationship with. In fact, it taught you a lot about yourself, and maybe you would never take it back. That's awesome. Who knows? Who knows what could happen in the future as well? I've certainly heard stories of people reconnecting again after years or, some amount of time. We can't expect that, but it is possible. But even if that did happen, you still need to grieve what's happening now. You need to grieve this version of your relationship because you're not going to get this back. So be kind to yourself, be honest with yourself, and try your best to be authentic. Approach instead of avoiding. It's going to be difficult no matter what, but you won't be as blindsided by it if you start working through it now and being real with yourself. So thank you very, very much for the question. Okay, on to question 2. Hello, I hope you're well. Thanks for all you do. My question is hopefully fairly simple. I have a new friend who I met about 6 months ago. We've gotten fairly close and I'm fond of him, very fond of him, and enjoy his company. The problem is that he can be moody and will sometimes snap at people. This is usually due to a misunderstanding, which is quickly cleared up, and then everyone moves on. This has happened with me, and I've observed it happen with others. I do not handle moody people very well. This is due to my own past, and particularly due to some childhood trauma. I'm extremely fond of this friend, but I'm racked with completely out of proportion anxiety every time I feel like I might get snapped at, and I know it doesn't contribute to a healthy friendship for either of us. Any tips on how I can handle this situation? Thank you. Well, thank you for writing in. It's great to hear that you've established a nice relationship with this person. It can be so hard to find friends that are genuine or romantic interests at times, and I'm so happy that you found a genuine connection here. I'm not sure exactly where on the spectrum this relationship falls, friends to lovers or whatever. It doesn't really matter, but regardless, it can be hard to find connections at times. Essentially what you're saying is that you like most things about being around this guy, but he snaps at people, and it's hard for you to deal with because of your own past. It makes you on edge, and you're just waiting for the moment when he snaps at you, which causes a strong reaction. So I can understand there's a lot of tension here. You might feel like you're walking on eggshells or waiting for the other shoe to drop and just worried about potentially him snapping, and also worried about yourself because of the type of reaction you tend to have to it. So much like the last question, first thing I would ask about the whole situation is, have you talked about it? I know that's basic advice, but so many times the answer is no. So I just want to make sure that you've talked about it. Maybe this is obvious to you, maybe not. But in friendships and relationships, it can be so helpful to just put things out there. And it seems like you guys are fairly comfortable with each other at this point. So I wonder if you might be able to ask him about this tendency that you mentioned. The way that you could say it is potentially saying like, hey, do you mind if I point out something that I've noticed? Kind of opening it up generally. Do you mind if I point out something? It seems like you get pretty frustrated when people are annoying to you, or you get set off pretty easily when people frustrate you. Do you notice that? Has this always been a thing for you, or is this kind of more recent? Sort of just throwing it out there generally. Like, does he know that this is a problem already or not? And this could generate some pretty good conversations for you guys. Maybe understanding more about where he's coming from can help with how reactive you are to his outbursts as well, right? It opens you up to talk more about what he's going through and also your situation. And the reason this is helpful is that talking about things helps to avoid misunderstandings that happen when all you can do is make assumptions either way. Like if he doesn't know why you're so tense or closed off, he might interpret that in a different way. If you see him, popping off at people and off at you, you might interpret him as a certain type of person when in reality, there's something else there. Maybe he has his own traumas, whatever. So just putting it out there and trying to be as open as possible can be a great thing. Maybe he has seen your discomfort. And if he doesn't know why you're agitated or uncomfortable or closed off, he might assume that it's because you don't like him as a friend or something like that, right? Just misinterpreting it. For your end of it, maybe you could tell him like, hey, I have a history of trauma and I wish I wasn't this way, but I am pretty sensitive to people showing anger openly. And you can talk to him about, you remember last time when we were driving and, you got so mad at that person that you stomped on your brake and you had to pull over for a second, whatever the case may be. I don't know. I'm making things up here, but, you bring it up in a specific example and then you can talk about like, hey, when that happened, like I really flipped into survival mode. Like my body elevated. I felt like I wanted to jump out of the car. I was scared. It was definitely more than was warranted for the situation. But I also feel like you maybe reacted a bit more than you should have to what happened. Is there anything we can do about that? And I think simply getting it out there in the open and approaching it can have a surprising impact. I've heard from so many people so many times that simply getting an issue out in the open helps to defuse it. It's not mysterious anymore. It's something to focus on, something to work on, and just having it in the open helps that along. Ideally, there would be work done on both sides of the equation. He would consider his responses while he's around you so that he's not unnecessarily triggering. And then on your side, there are things you could work on for the trauma, right? So working on things like physiological regulation, relaxation, deep breathing techniques, exposure work to build a better tolerance to your own anxiety and the sensations that come along when you are triggered. If you can do both of those things, that could be a great way to move forward. And I think you also may want to talk to some other people, trusted people, about the situation as well. So family members, friends, therapists, whoever it is, you can let them know what's happened and get their perspective on it. I know that you're motivated to see the best in him, but it could be that his responses are more than just a little inappropriate. What you're describing here is sort of just high reactivity, but from the outside, if somebody was actually to hear the details, it could be that it's more than that. And we want to make sure you're not just being involved with somebody that's actually abusive. In the end, I think once you discuss things and you lay it out there and you ask for some sort of change, you're also allowed to have boundaries. If he can't stem the tide of his anger and you're continually uncomfortable because of how explosive he is, you don't have to put up with that. You could let him know, hey, I care about you. I want to spend time with you, but I can't do this part of it. So if you're angry like that, if that happens again, I'm going to have to just walk away. And then that can happen. You're at lunch. He snaps at the waiter. He gets angry. You ask him to cool it and he just gets more pissed off. Then you could say, okay, here's some cash. I'm going to take off. Hopefully I'll see you soon. And you leave. Hopefully it doesn't come to this, right? But you do need to do what you have to do. So first, talk about it. Lead with curiosity and openness. Understand why he's acting this way. Share your experiences if you can. Then go from there. Let's not assume too much about what will happen when you talk about this, but please don't avoid the situation and just hope that it spontaneously resolves. You don't need to be living in so much tension, and I think you'll be pleased with how much that tension is resolved simply by getting it out in the open. So thank you for the question. I appreciate you. That's about what I have to say about this. Short and sweet episode this time, guys, but this is it. This has been episode 351 of the Hardcore Self-Help Podcast. Thank you for listening. If you want to send me in a question for the show, send me an email to duffthepsych@gmail.com. If you want the show notes for this episode, go to duffthepsych.com/episode 351. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you for the next episode. Bye.